Simpson and I agree is a key priority for public lands. The budget includes investments of oil and gas program. The administration once again proposed new authority for BLM to collect onshore oil and gas inspection fees. Resulting revenue would cover the cost of BLM's onshore inspections and activities to help ensure that the extraction operations are safe, environmentally responsible, and ensure a fair return to the taxpayer. This new fee authority would also bring parity to how the federal government treats offshore and onshore oil and gas inspections. Appropriately managing people's lands and ensuring that these precious resources are available for both current and future generations is a solemn responsibility you carry out, sir. We depend on our public lands for a variety of uses, including ranching, energy development, recreation, hunting, and conservation. The way we use our public lands have grown and changed over the years and will continue to evolve in the future. And it's understandably that there will sometimes be competing and often conflicting ideas on how we should prioritize and use our lands. But these disagreements should be discussed and debated peacefully and lawfully. There should be no tolerance for threats of violence or intimidation against public servants who are truly the caretakers of our lands. No one is above the law. So, Director, I appreciate the work that you and the employees, all the employees of the Bureau of Land Management do, and I look forward to your testimony, and I thank you for the courtesy of an opening statement, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. McCollum, with your concurrence, I think we should just recess for a few minutes, go and vote, and we'll come back for your opening statement. So we'll be having recess for some. reconvene. Director, you may begin your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the committee. I think, as you know, the Bureau of Land Management manages 13% of the nation's lands and about a third of its minerals and soils. We manage these lands under the dual framework of multiple use and sustained yield, which is a mandate from Congress, which hits its 40th anniversary this year. Our professionals throughout the country, but particularly in the West, have very hard choices to make every day, and they work diligently to make sure that the public has a serious role and voice in the work that we do. We're proud to play a major role in the nation's economy, supporting oil and gas development, all kinds of recreation, ranching, hunting and fishing, helium production, forest management, wildland firefighting. We even have weather stations, and we work with reindeer herders in Alaska. We do a little bit of everything. The agency in total helped support more than 450,000 jobs last year. Additionally, we are one of only a handful of agencies in the entire government that brings back more revenue than we receive in appropriations. In fact, for every dollar that you provide to us, we return about 5. Now, I want to highlight a few areas from our budget, and I'll move quickly through these. But I'll start with greater sage grouse. This one's for you, Mark.
Thank you, Neil.
The BLM has made great strides in the past year, helping to lead a West-wide effort with governors from 11 states to strengthen management of sage grouse habitat and avoid the need for a listing by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But our work is far from done. The President's budget asked for a $14 million increase over the $60 million that you were very kind and gracious to support us with last year. We very much appreciate it. We're expanding our BLM's conservation efforts partially through the work on a national seed strategy. And the basic idea there is getting the right seed to the right place at the right time. Too often we have situations where maybe in Burley, Idaho, they need to restore some lands, but they're sourcing seed from eastern Montana or northern Washington state. We need to have more seed growers, more diversity in what we're offering so that we can come back stronger. Collectively, with these requests, the BLM's resources dedicated to sage grouse conservation will total $79 million in the fiscal year 17 and represent a critical investment in Western communities and Western values. Now, on the energy front, the oil and gas program at the BLM is performing very well. Industry currently has nearly 4 years' worth of permits in their hands that they could use today. I mean, many people will tell you that there's efforts afoot to slow down oil and gas development in this country on behalf of agencies like the one that I have the privilege to lead. We have 4 years of permits that we've been working very hard on. The backlog is coming down. The front log is growing. We put 4 million acres of lands available out for lease last year. Industry picked up only 15% of those lands. Now, at the same time, we have a great responsibility to ensure that these oil and gas operations are carried out responsibly. There's a proposal in this year, as it was last year, in the budget, asking for support, permanent support, for an inspection program. We have about 160 inspectors in this nation. We need more like 220. Having the type of support for a permanent program would be essential to achieving many of the goals, not just in an inspection, but around our larger oil and gas program. I was in front of the authorizers yesterday and had a good discussion about this issue, and appreciate your support and hope that we can get this done this year. National conservation lands are another highlight of our budget, and I do want to thank you for the $5 million increase that you put into last year's budget. These are lands that the nation and the nation's people are very excited about. So over the last 20 years or so, BLM has been the face of conservation in terms of action that Congress has taken and action that the President has taken. We have nearly 900 conservation units across the country. These are places where vegetation is heavy. People are excited to go there. They're excited to have them near their communities. And it's we think, part of the best of what we have as a nation. So we appreciate your support for that program. And this year, we're asking for $50 million in support, which really is for the basics. We want to have an assigned manager full-time staff for each unit, for each of the major units, national conservation areas and national monuments. That's step one, in addition to all the other responsibilities we have in these areas. Wild horses and burros is another hot topic for us and very important for us to figure out the right next steps. In short, we have the recommended total population around the West should be just under 30,000 horses. We have about 60,000 horses on the range today, and we have another 50,000 horses that we've removed and are in pastures or corrals. Now, when those horses get removed, we spend up to $50,000 on that horse over the course of its lifetime. I think there are some opportunities for us to be creative, potentially looking at tax credits or other programs to incentivize adoption. But a specific proposal that we have in this year's budget is we have a productive relationship with the Border Patrol. I've actually been to the border, had 2 or 3 rangers come up on formerly wild horses and burros, and visited with those folks, and you can see the Freeze brand. And we send about 30 horses to the Border Patrol each year. But they cannot accept them as an agency. The individual rangers have to adopt them in their personal capacity. And also, we are still, because of the way the Wild Horse and Burro Act is written, we have to go back and check on them. We have to second guess the Border Patrol's management and care for those horses. We'd like to change that. So we have a proposal that is looking for your concurrence in allowing us to convey directly horses to other federal, state, and local agencies that have a need for workhorses, and would use them, for those purposes. So we're trying to take a small step forward, but look forward to other conversations about, we're also heavily engaged in research, looking at spay and neuter, looking at long-term birth control efforts. Lastly, I'll mention 2 other legislative pieces. One is the BLM Foundation. Congressman Lowenthal and the ranking member were leaders in putting in legislation just a few days ago to make that a reality. And we appreciate that support very much, and we hope that we can gather some more support and get some momentum behind that legislation. I think we can make some important differences in some of the bigger programs that people care about within the Bureau of Land Management. And I'll say yesterday at my hearing with the authorizers, I got a number of questions about land disposal. And we have had a proposal in the budget for a few years for a very poorly named act, the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act, or FLTFA. Basically what this is, it allows us to take lands that are sold, capture that revenue partially for conservation inside of the state where it's sold, but also to have a source of revenue to work on future land sales. So it's a win-win for all parties, and we would be very excited to see that reenacted and stood up within this year's Congress. I appreciate your time. This committee has been wonderful to work with, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, I thank you for coming out today, Mr. Kornze, and let's just start off with, since you brought it up first, I'll bring it up too, sage grouse. In the omnibus, Congress directed BLM to issue guidance to its state offices on how it will update sage grouse habitat maps, adopt new scientific information, and engage partners. I believe guidance would allay much of the unnecessary or uncertainty regarding how BLM will implement the resource management plans. So the first question is, how or has BLM issued the guidance?
We are working on a range of guidance. I believe we've got 12 different guidance documents that you'll see in the coming months. We are working closely with the Western Governors Association, Sage Grouse Task Force, and others to make sure that we're getting the right eyes and thoughts, right eyes on and thoughts into those documents. So we will be moving aggressively over the next 3 months or so to make sure that those are all issued.
How about these maps, the sage grouse habitat maps? Have you updated those maps?
So
Are
we
you
are
working with the states too, also with those?
We are absolutely working with the states. So in the case of the state of Nevada, the congressman from my hometown is sitting to my left. The state of Nevada is working with the USGS to update their map. Mr. Coates, I think, is leading that effort. And so we have received a sort of high-level version of that map, but we don't have the GIS layers yet. So we're using it to the degree that we can, but looking forward to the formal updated version.
Well, as you know, we put a significant increase of dollars in your budget because for the reason we do not want this species listed. We don't want to have you coming to us later on and say there's some reason we have to do this. We want to do everything we can to make sure that that does not happen. With that, Ms. McCullum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the recognition on Mr. Lowenthal and I having a bill to authorize the foundation for the BLM. But I have to say I was disappointed that the budget proposes to eliminate the Challenge Cost Share program. So this program is what's kind of in place right now to allow BLM to partner with local organizations to to do on-the-ground habitat, recreation, and cultural resources work. So can you tell us why this program is scheduled to be eliminated? Because the leverage for private funds to help engage the public in the work that you do is very important. And then the other question I have is on the oil and gas rule. The administration on January 22nd proposed a rule that would limit the rate of flaring at oil wells on public and tribal lands. In addition to the proposed rule would modify the existing royalty rate and provisions to better align BLM's authority to enhance flexibility, but the rule would not raise royalty rates. So I think of them as common sense regulation. And I did share with this committee a year ago, maybe some of you remember, a satellite image that showed lights flaring from the satellite in the Bakken fields that were almost as bright or brighter than the entire Twin Cities metropolitan area. So I think those regulations are needed. And so could you maybe talk a little bit about the Challenge Cost Share program and then what you're hearing from industry and what you expect this rule on the flaring to be able to accomplish for us? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet. So on the Challenge Cost Share, that really comes down to hard choices. Over the last 5 years or so, we've lost about 12% of our full-time equivalent positions in the agency. So we are stretched. And part of that's because the wild horse and burro budget has doubled in size. Right? It's literally being eaten. We're spending more than $50 million a year on housing the horses that have been taken off the range. So that's why that's such an important issue to get our arms around. In terms of Challenge Cost Share, it is very productive. When we can put money into that, it pays dividends. But at this point, we have so many needs in terms of sage grouse and improving our energy programs and modernizing, really trying to take a leap forward with the agency and bring it forward and even sort of eclipse perhaps some of our partner agencies and getting information out there and emphasizing the ability your ability to access the public lands. So that's on that one. On venting and flaring, the core issue there is that when folks are out, we have more than 100,000 oil and gas wells on public lands, more than nearly $400 million worth of gas is wasted each year through venting, through flaring. So some states like North Dakota, Colorado, Wyoming have started to step into this space, and we have been working to have regulations that work with theirs and build on their strengths and to make sure that we are sending this energy into a productive pathway. It's enough energy, if harnessed, to power 5 million different homes. So it's pretty significant, and we feel like it needs action. There's a royalty provision in that regulation which would essentially take off the handcuffs of future secretaries. So it's unlikely that the secretary would be able to use it, but currently we're locked at 12.5% as a ceiling by regulation. And so this would allow future secretaries to look at current economic conditions and figure out if there's a reason to adjust up or down. Prior to 1988, the secretary had the ability to do that, and there were often royalties on a sliding scale based on production.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. I understand that. I mean, wild horses and burros, that's been a problem forever. I was under the impression that when Jefferson did the Louisiana Purchase, he wanted to include Nevada because he said that's a place we're going to need to put wild horses and burros eventually. But maybe I was wrong on that. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm mistaken. First of all, I understand an issue that deals with the Steens and fencing that you've been looking at and are gonna address Congressman Walden's issue dealing with the ranchers and the fencing out there. Is that
We
correct?
do. We've been in touch with Congressman Walden just this morning and working on the NEPA process to complete that action and have set aside the money to work on that fence project.
Good, thank you. Let me talk for just a minute about sage grouse and focal areas. Because focal areas were, as I talked to governors, at least my governor, and people who worked on the sage grouse plans and other things for the states, they always come back to the focal areas, that these were thrown in on top of these state plans that they've been working on and that they knew nothing about them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've heard a different take on it, that the original plans that Fish and Wildlife came up with had no disturbance areas, and they were pretty large areas. And that BLM said, we're going to have a problem with this. And Fish and Wildlife went back and reduced those areas down to the high priority areas that they called focal areas. So they are a portion of what would have been a much larger no disturbance area. Is that an accurate statement?
That's roughly accurate, yes. The Fish and Wildlife Service, we sat down, they had very broad visions of potentially withdrawing all lands where sage grouse are. And we knew that probably wasn't a viable path forward. So we encouraged them to think on a more refined basis, and they came forward with the focal areas that we have now.
How do focal areas impact grazing?
Focal areas, they don't impact grazing in terms of changed standards. What we're doing is, in our grazing program, we have a great need for support there because we have 18,000 permits nationwide. 6,000 of those are in backlog status. Right? So what we have to do is we have to prioritize, and what our sage grouse plans say is that the focal areas will get priority. That's essentially what it is.
How do the priority habitat management areas impact grazing? And also the general management areas?
Yeah, so similar, we look at them as a tiered process. So you start in the focal areas, you head to the broader priority habitat, and then you go to the general. So a lot of what comes out of the sage grouse plans is rather than looking at the landscape all the same, that we now have a way to delineate priorities based on landscape.
Because I've got county commissioners and so forth, and some ranchers and stuff said that they're going to lose 40 or 50% of their grazing ability to graze, grazing lands, with this sage grouse proposal. Is that accurate?
I don't think it will be. And we have heard some concern from the cattle industry. And so one of the things you're going to see from us in the next few months is we're going to have workshops in the western states where we're going to sit down with the grazing community and talk through exactly how this works. I think it's very workable. And frankly, we spent a great deal of time in the finalization steps of the plan, making sure that the grazing piece in particular was going to work for western communities.
As far as the proposed increase that both you and the Forest Service have, the $250 administration fee for AUM, and the potential fee to go up a maximum of 25%, that's been proposed before, and the committee has rejected. As I talk to cattlemen, they understand that the AUM price needs to go up, that there ought to be an increase in that. What they would like to see, and have repeatedly stated, is they would like to see a 5-year, 10-year plan of how we're going to increase. So it's gradual sort of increase instead of a potential doubling overnight of the fee. And so far, nobody's ever come back to us with a gradual sort of increase in fees. And I would encourage the administration to give us something along those lines that we could look at, or at least the whatever resources committee, so that they could look at it, so that there was a gradual, predictable increase in AUM fees, because most ranchers understand that it's been there forever, where it currently is, and that it naturally needs to go up, and I think the cattle industry agrees with that. One last issue. Have you been in contact at all with state of Idaho or any of your people relative to recharge the aquifer in the Snake River Plain aquifer?
I'm not aware of that issue.
They're just kind of starting, and I didn't know if they've got to the BLM yet. They've been talking to the BOR and so forth, and they're going to put forth a recharge plan, and it's not fully settled yet. So I wouldn't expect them to have anything that you could actually look at yet. But recharge areas are going to be on BLM grounds. There are issues of what do you call it, right-of-ways on canals and stuff that are going to go through BLM property and that go through there now. But they are used for irrigation purposes and those types of things. But I've told them that they need to get in touch with BLM and with BOR and start working so that they can have a plan that we can look at, because they'd like to recharge the aquifer that's going down substantially. And there are periods of time when we have excess water that we just flush down the river now because it's just there. And it would be nice to recharge that aquifer. But I would encourage you in your office to work with State Idaho and with our office in developing some plans that might work. So
I'll be happy to look into that.
thank you.
And one note on the grazing issue, I appreciate the invitation for a broader conversation. I think part of what we struggle with is that, with the system having so many strains on it, with a third of the permits being in backlog status, part of that comes from the fact that the grazing fee goes 50% back to the county where it was raised and
Right.
50% to range improvements. $0 go to supporting the grazing program.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of pieces that need to be examined.
Well, we ought to look at that whole program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Israel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director. Director, the President's budget includes a proposal to make it easier for Interior to transfer wild horses to local, state, and other federal agencies to be used as work animals. I'm concerned that if the proposal is not effectively implemented, it will simply make it easier for those horses to ultimately go to slaughter. And I'd appreciate it if you would tell us what safeguards will be instituted so that we know that those horses remain safe.
So when folks adopt horses right now, they have to sign a contract with us that indicates their intention and commitment to not sending that horse into being slaughtered or go into products related to that. So we could work out something similar with these agencies, or if Congress wanted to insert language that would make that a requirement, we would be welcome to it.
The proposal, as it's currently constructed, does not have that requirement?
Well, the proposal says that if you're working with a trusted public agency and they're looking for a work animal, that we should be able to title that animal over.
I want to make sure I understand this. So when somebody adopts a wild horse, as I understand what you just said, there is a requirement that they commit not to send that horse to slaughter, or are you saying that there's a distinction if the animal is transferred to a public agency, that requirement is not currently?
It's not in the current language, and we would be open to seeing that language.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director, thank you for many years of service, and I think the relationship that we've developed, we've had opportunities to work together on some things, and I thank you for that. As we discussed yesterday, I think the prairie dog in southern Utah is a good example of some collaborative efforts, and although we've had some hiccups along the way as a result of this lawsuit, we still expect to be able to work with you regardless of how that lawsuit may turn out on appeal. And as we discussed yesterday as well, we look forward to working with you on some of these issues in Washington County with the resource management plan. By the way, we met with Mr. Ash after our meeting, and I believe there is a pathway for us to have some success in addressing the concerns of the local officials there as well. So having said that, I'm going to kind of shotgun this if we could, because there's so many issues that we would like to discuss with you, and I'll address them very quickly maybe, but some of them in a little more detail. I appreciate you bringing up the horses and the burros, which is, an enormous concern in my district. And if you care about horses, you can't look at these herds and feel good about the outcome for these animals. If you care about the range, you can't look at this and feel good about the outcome. unhealthy herds, and some of these horses are starving to death, as you know, and it's destroying much of the range. So we appreciate your concern there, and I know you're sincere in that. Now, I have a bill, it's several years old now, appropriate, called WHO bill, Wild Horse Oversight Act, which deals with allowing some of the states to accept some control over these animals, maybe even transferring control of these animals to the states. States manage our deer populations, they manage elk, they manage turkey. Why is the federal government only and exclusively responsible for managing these wild horse and burros? Would you support that act? And I know, you don't have it before you, but I mean, just in general principle, would you support the idea of the states having more control over these animals?
Well, I think it's an interesting issue. I often explain to people that there's 3 types of animals in this country. There's wildlife, which are regulated by governors. There are endangered and threatened species, which are regulated by the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then there are wild horses and burros.
Heaven knows these aren't endangered. Oh,
yeah. And then there are wild horse and burros, which land with the Bureau of Land Management. So I think it's an oddity that deserves to be looked at. Part of our effort with the language that we put forward this year is to see if we can eliminate the sense that working on wild horse and burro issues is a third rail of politics.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of commonality to be had between both sides of the aisle on this. So we welcome a conversation about the road ahead. I don't have that bill in front of me, so I can't comment
But in general
specifically.
principle, it's not something you would oppose.
We need more partners, states, other organizations, because we are overwhelmed at this point.
Switching subjects quickly, if I could, and that is, and I'm going to repeat myself from yesterday a little bit, although I'll do it more briefly. And I'm not doing this because I don't have something to say. I'm doing this because what I said is what I really believe, and that is, we go to my district, as you and I have talked about many times. We talk to miners who are losing their jobs. We talk to teachers who are losing their jobs because their schools are dying. And the reason their schools are dying is because the families are leaving. It's not like the people there suddenly quit having kids. They're still having children, but the families are leaving because timber, mining, ranching, all of these, these lifestyles, not just jobs, but actual lifestyles, just don't exist any longer. You talk to ranchers, and I have to elaborate on this just a little bit because I always remember this meeting with the rancher. He's an older gentleman, a humble man with a humble family, shows us this piece of paper, as Mr. Simpson said, I'm losing 50% of my BLM grazing permits, and he's scared to death of the federal government. He's not, he's not a rebel. He's not going to go out and join some militia, but he's scared of the federal government and doesn't know how to respond to that. And finally, a businessman who had a thriving business, and now their economy transitioned over to a tourist industry economy, or tourist-based, and now his business is only open 3.5 months a year. All of that, and this is a key, all of that because of one federal decision to create a monument. And those are the impacts because of that. So, as we have discussed, we're fearful of another monument being created in Utah without the input of those people who will be most affected by it. I wonder if you would respond to that, if you could, your intentions on monuments in Utah. We know what Ms. Jewell said yesterday. I'd be interested in what you think.
Well, I think monuments have an important place on the landscape. They've been hugely productive for a lot of communities, but it's important that those are done through a public conversation.
And I appreciate that, because that really is the key to this, having that, that local input. And it concerns me a little bit when we see outside groups who come in and claim to be local groups when they're not. And we've seen that with some of the tribal interests in this case, as well as others. And I won't describe to you why I'm asking this question. It would take a little bit too long. So I'll just ask the question and let you respond to it. And that is, we've heard some, I don't want to say rumors, but some thought among some of how this potential monument would be managed. And my question to you is would it be lawful to transfer management of a monument to an entity outside of the BLM? Or would the BLM always have to claim management for that monument?
I don't know that we, absent direction from Congress, I'm not sure what authority we would have in that space. So I'd have to look into the details of what you're putting forward here.
Well, I tell you what, maybe I'll follow up with you individually, but can we agree on this, that if the BLM were to designate, or the federal government were to designate a monument, the default position would be that BLM or some other government entity, federal government entity, would manage that monument?
I'm not aware of any situation in which it's been done otherwise.
Otherwise?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you support, in theory, a situation where someone might, other than the federal government, manage that monument?
We would need to be talking about something specific, but
Okay. All right. Howie, we don't have a clock, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry. I'll hit one very quickly, and then Neil ask you to respond, and that is, we talked about this yesterday as well. We have this one mine who did a very good job in restoration and mitigating some of the impacts. And as a result of that, the sage grouse moved into an area where they didn't exist before. And now, because of the presence of sage grouse and because they did the responsible thing in restoration, they're probably going to be shut down because sage grouse now exists. It's, as we said, the most southern lek that we know. What do I say to those guys? I mean, the perverse incentive there is ironic beyond my ability to say, well, congratulations, you did a great job, and now you're going to reap the benefits of that. Help me understand what I should say to those folks.
well, I think you're referring to the Alton coal mine.
Yeah.
And this is a tough situation. There's two serious hurdles to that project. One is the pause on the coal program for any project that does not currently have a record of decision, unless you can fit into various emergency categories. So that's one thing that we've discussed that can be looked at. The other is the fact that,
And by the way, as we discussed, we think we're okay on that. We think they would fit within the criteria of the emergency exception, which is good.
Okay.
But now we come to the second one.
which is, as we worked west-wide on sage-grouse issues, we're looking at one of the key parts of the responsibility of the Bureau of Land Management is we have multiple use and sustained yield. Those are the two core tenets that this Congress asks us to manage on. And part of the sustained yield is related to renewable resources, which includes wildlife habitat. And so during the course of my lifetime, greater sage-grouse populations have dropped 40%. And so somewhere that suggests that the BLM and others have perhaps not maintained that renewable resource of wildlife habitat to the degree it should be. And so as we went through our planning process and worked with states to identify the best habitat, one of the places that Utah said was the best habitat is this site. And it does, in fact, have the southernmost lek in the United States. And so as you identified, I think this presents a very hard situation for us to work through.
And I appreciate what you're saying. I would just say in conclusion that this probably isn't the only example or potential example where someone would look at this going, if we restore, if we create habitat, if we help to protect the species, there may be a negative outcome for us in doing that. And if we do, and if that is the case, I hope we would consider that. So thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Amadei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Neil, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Neil, thanks for your continued willingness to meet with us. I'm going to start out with a couple things. I'm not going to take the committee's time up, but I want to kind of highlight them for you because they'll be coming to your staff. We've got a situation in Nevada with a lithium property in Silver Peak that's got a little protest going on in terms of ownership and transfer, and there are some issues with respect to when that can happen and how that can happen that emanate through your solicitor's office in Sacramento that I'm going to be asking you for a briefing on offline, because there's some stuff that's a little, anyhow, we need some more facts on it. Also, your Planning 2.0 effort is one that, since a lot of the information on it in terms of stuff that we learned from going through the resource management plan updates for the 11 states, we want to kind of see where you're going on that. I've read what NACO puts out on it, and there's two sides to every story, so I'd kind of like the other side on that if I could. The final one, briefing-wise, is the Secretary laid out a deal about science yesterday and more money in Interior for science and stuff like that. And so I want to pass that on to you, that we're concerned that a lot of the science about the Great Basin, as you well know, Sage Hen Crossroads of the West, the majority of the Great Basin, sagebrush steppe ecosystem, and every time I talk to the Desert Research Institute folks and the folks in the Department of Agriculture at the University of Nevada, and even sometimes NRCS and even USGS about, has anybody talking to you about these chicken issues from Nevada? And while the director has said, I'm happy to work with them, I haven't seen much of that. So I want to revisit that and go, I'm not telling you to do what the Nevada science says, but I think they ought to have a seat at the table when we're talking about that. So I'd kind of like a briefing on that, and thank you guys for your willingness to do that. I want to follow up on the focal area stuff real quick. In preparation for the hearing, we asked Fish and Forest Service and you guys, where'd the boundaries come from? And we did that about 60 days ago. And the only response we got was from the Forest Service, and I'm quoting them, sagebrush focal area boundaries were given to us by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Were they given to you by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
All right, so range of questions. I'll work through them quickly.
No, the other ones I want briefings on. I
Okay.
don't want you to work on. The question, your first question is, Forest Service said they got their sagebrush focal area boundaries over their real estate from Fish and Wildlife Service. Is that true for BLM?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So we asked the same question, and the Fish and Wildlife Service said, we got our experts in the room, and this is the map that we came out with.
So it's fair to me, if I want to talk about how that got created and where the boundaries are, I need to talk to Dan Ash about that.
That's right.
Okay, great, thank you. I also want to touch on, Secretary Jewell said, hey, I'm talking with Governor Sandoval, which is a great thing, and I said, okay, so what's the framework for that? Do you have like secretarial discretion or whatever? And her answer, I think I heard her say, is, well, he's kind of highlighting things for me, and I'm passing them down to Neil, and they're going to John Roos, and there you go, and that Neil has specific authority under that stuff. All well and good in my mind. But when we talk about things like maps that were brought up earlier, and it's like, okay, we got a new map that has a PJ and an urban overlay to it, and the RMP amendment process is not nimble, and I'm not saying that critically, I'm just saying it as a historical observation. We don't amend those things every couple years. And when I first go out to the field and I'm in 3 district offices, it's like, so how do we account for the fact that the White Pine Public Lands Management Act has 15,000 acres, I believe you had a hand in that, for economic development between Ely and McGill, and now we've got one of the iterations of map that says that's now chicken habitat. It's like, before we even get to, well, this one was signed by the president and this one was signed by the secretary, you know, it's like, how do we react to those things? Because I got pass a new law, lands law, which a lot of us are too old to probably see that come to fruition. Go amend the RMPs, or one of them said, hey, I've got some discretion in that if I find a what's the guidance in terms of how these people react to things? And not that maps should get smaller, because we know from instances over the summer that there are areas of habitat that weren't marked that should be marked. And so my concern is when you talk about real-time stuff, whether it's grazing, whether it's whatever, to amend those is not an easy process if we look historically. Anything new in the making for amending those?
So very quickly on part of the mapping, I think, comes down to best available science, right? So we want the best available information. We're excited to be working with the state and USGS on getting, I think, the now 3rd iteration of the Nevada maps. So, and we're waiting for that to be peer reviewed. I understand is where it's at with the state of Nevada, which is why we only have a high level concept of what that map looks like right now. The plans themselves are designed to have some flexibility in them. You know, so we have priority habitat, we have general habitat, but beyond that, there are pathways to development based on different criteria on the maps, including disturbance calculations. So, you know, when it comes to, for instance, some of the issues have been litigated in Nevada, in White Pine County. You know, we've been able to work through the allowance in the plan to make certain steps possible. And in terms of speed on amending the plans, so Planning 2.0 is, you know, going to feel very obscure. We're looking to update our planning regulations, but BLM doesn't do anything without a plan underneath it. And so those are taking way too long and way too slow, and they're way too expensive. So the concept here is we asked our team, we said, took some of our brightest people, put them in a room and said, figure out how to make this work better. And what they came back with was counterintuitive, but I think somewhat brilliant, which is they said, let's add a couple extra steps into the process. They said, let's start by raising our hand and saying, please bring your best information and your best science to the table so that we don't get surprised by somebody with information 2/3 of the way down the road and we have to start over, which happens a lot. And the other piece is, you know, so you would have that information call, You would have your scoping meetings to talk about the big issues. Then before we get to a draft plan, usually we go away, people don't hear much from us between the scoping meetings and a draft. We would have a halfway step where we would put out in a simple, let's say 20-page document with some meetings where we would describe what we're thinking about doing.
If I might, I'll get
You
the
bet.
rest of that online, but I appreciate
You
that.
bet.
Focal areas are going to require quite a bit of minerals examinations, I understand. The minerals examiner population in BLM right now isn't impressive, and it's older than me, which is the R word, retirement. I would like to talk to you about that offline in terms of, if we got 5,000 of these things to do, and we haven't got a lot of examiners and minerals examinations, I just kind of want to get a feeling for how that's going to go. And with that, I think in view of how much fun we're having this morning, I'll yield back and look forward to talking to you and your folks offline about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd just like to get back to wild horses and burros real quick. We spent a lot of time on this issue, but we talked about this in the office. We spray and neuter cats and dogs, and we certainly should be doing that with the horses and burros. So where are you at on that? Tell us where you're at.
Some of the research projects that we've stood up in the last few years are looking specifically at this. Spay and neuter is going to be very important. We don't have a drug right now that lasts more than 1 year, and we cannot touch all.
Well, there's things you can do that is permanent. If you
Yeah.
have to.
Yep, and so that's why we have to look at that, right? So at some point, maybe we have a drug that lasts for 5 years or is permanent, but right now we're going to have to look at spay and neuter in the short to medium term because it's really one of the only tools we have.
Well, I think that we ought to take, not just look at it. Have a broad approach to apply it in the field. Do you intend to do that?
We are. It looks like we may be headed in that direction. Out of force of necessity.
Mr. Chair, on this point, is one, between the spay and the neutering, is one less expensive and is one quicker? And you talk about both, so if one's quicker and less expensive, to make a bigger dent in the population, should you just kind of go with one of the forms of permanent birth control for a while?
That is a great question, and I want to come back to you with an answer in terms of speed and cost.
I think I might have an idea, but I won't be indelicate at the hearing. Thank you.
Yeah, well, but obviously we have an overpopulation on the range, and it's as Mr. Stewart brought out, that this is not good for the horses, and it's certainly not good for the ranchers, and it's certainly not good for the environment. So I would think that's more of a permanent solution if we can start moving in that direction. I think that we should get support for that.
Yeah, and let me mention quickly that, as I look at the $50,000 per horse cost, I think there's room for creativity there. Right. This is not the Ways and Means Committee, but I would imagine that someday I would hope Ways and Means or others would look at that and say, maybe part of that $50,000 could be used to incentivize adoptions. And a fair amount of money, whatever's left over after you pay that incentive, would be savings to the U.S. government. It would be good for the rangeland. It would be good for the folks that are adopting the horses. So I think there's
I think that's part of the solution. I think that's certainly worth looking into, but right now we need to stop the number of horses that are being born out in the range. Any other comments or any other questions? I know we have a series of votes, and so we appreciate your being here, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more from members individually. With that, we're adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dale.